a code red for humanity. Curb emissions and dramatically reduce consumption or face a world that is fundamentally different.
Changes in ice sheets, deep ocean temperature, they are irreversible and will continue for generations to come.
This is the very last moment we have in which we can actually hope to stem some of these disasters.
It is unequivocal that human activities are responsible for climate change.
If unprecedented changes are not made and made soon, there will be irreversible damage to the planet.
Zero carbon.
East Talk. Hello and welcome to Zero Carbonista Series 3, The Sky's the Limit. I'm Ian Collins and this is the UK's #1 green-based podcast. And here's some breaking news. I'm leaving. I've enjoyed working with Dale, but I've decided to go and work with another environmental podcast. I thought it best not to give any notice or even bother to have the decency to have a basic conversation. Bye.
Okay.
Morning, Dale.
Yeah, morning, Ian.
Yeah, sorry to do that to you twice in 1 week.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm over it. Anyway.
Good.
I'm over it.
We had a lot of questions on that. In fact, I mean, it might just be worth responding to Tim on Facebook. It says, how long until you get a new head coach in place? And yeah, has the dust settled, I guess?
Yeah, dust has settled for me, you know, the kind of emotional dust really, because, I'd put a lot of faith in that guy, Rob, and, had fended off the media for a whole week saying, look, these are just rumors, because if there's any truth in it, I know that Rob would have told me because, I know him, but obviously I didn't. So that dust has settled. How long will it take to get a new head coach? I think it'd probably be a couple of weeks or something like that, because our director of football had a contingency plan because he knew this would happen one day. He's got himself a bit of a shortlist already. So we might cut straight to his shortlist rather than open the doors there's 100 applicants last time. So, I don't think it'll take very long. And we need to be quick, of course, because we're in a very short gap now between the end of one season and the start of the next one.
Well, as me old Nan would have said, of all places, Watford.
Font of a lot of wisdom, you old man.
Oh yeah, very prophetic, that woman. Let's move to this. Environmental tipping points rapidly approaching. Now, we've talked about this many, many times. I'm always kind of curious when I see these headlines rapidly approaching, because I think 2 years ago you were warning things were rapidly approaching.
Yeah, the tipping points have been clear. You know, we've seen them coming, and they're not any more clear really now than they were a couple of years ago. You know, and if they happen, then they're going to make life, far more difficult. You know, the prevention of catastrophic climate change gets more difficult if we hit tipping points. So great to have another warning, but what are the government going to do about it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's a story that kind of feeds into that. And you look at this and you scratch your head and you think, did I read that correctly? UK airlines have missed all their climate targets for the last 22 years, except for one.
I love this one, actually.
They also set their own goals as well, which is kind of interesting.
And that's, for me, essentially the point of the article, that the airline industry can't be trusted to self-regulate on the climate, because all of the targets they've missed are their own targets. They set them,
yes.
So you'd think that they weren't too stretching if they set them, but they were stretching enough that they couldn't hit them. And
that's the point, isn't it? Because lots of people talk about self-regulation rather than sort of governmental regulation. It's always a little bit iffy and suspicious, but, you can see why they would agitate for that. And then you think, well, okay, so what they've done, they've thought, well, if we let the government do this, it's going to be really tricky. So I know what we'll do. We'll play a sneaky one here. We'll have our own targets. Therefore, we can't possibly miss them. And they've missed them.
Yeah. And also it's about deflection, isn't it? It's about saying, no, that's fine. We understand climate change, it's happening and we've got a role to play, blah, blah, blah. One of the great examples from this article that I love is that in 2010, Virgin said 10% of all their fuel would be biofuel by 2020. And then there was silence. And in 2021, they said 10% of our fuel will be biofuel by 2030. They just kicked it 10 years further down the road. So, yeah. I mean, what are they doing? And Branson pledged £3 billion, right, to fight the climate crisis, and hasn't delivered any of it.
And it's interesting, the last figures on this that we unearthed, 2018, air travel was responsible for 7 or 8% of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions. Now, you don't really have to know much about this area to know that is extraordinarily disproportionate.
That's right. And the government are saying that, don't worry, we can carry on flying and still get to net zero by 2050. But that's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. And, they're the people that want to give us a third runway at Heathrow and all this other kind of nonsense. But these people, government, the airline industry, they're just deflecting us with big targets and warm words about doing something. And then they get on with business as usual. We can't let them do that.
Question here from Simon on Twitter. Do you think the government might finally agree to your windfall tax? It's interesting. I was listening to Boris Johnson giving an interview with a down market speech station the other day, and he was in full denial mode about this. No, I don't agree with it. It's not the right thing to do. It curtails investment, even though one massive oil company said this week, no, it doesn't. We'll still invest, despite all of that. And I've got a funny feeling that there's a big old argument going on, because I think Rishi Sunak probably would go for a windfall tax.
It does appear that way. And the arguments the government are giving for no windfall tax, they are BS, absolutely. As you say, the oil companies are saying, no, that's not going to deter investment. In any case, we don't need investment in fossil fuels, right? And there was also a claim that it would affect pensioners who hold shares in BP and Shell and stuff like that. So some think tank did a study. Guess what? British pensioners own bugger all of both those companies, and it would be foreign investors that were here. But the point that they also miss is that these are windfall profits. They don't affect normal investment. They don't affect normal dividends. They're just something on top that the companies didn't expect and don't need to keep. So there we go. But Rishi today has said, he's keeping all options open, I think, or this week rather, he's keeping all options open. And if the companies don't invest, then we'll have a windfall tax. And this is just part of that false narrative. If they don't invest, it's just rubbish.
Why would they not invest? They have to invest regardless, surely. I mean, that's just stupid argument. Yeah. And of course, I think we might have touched on this last week, but, even Margaret Thatcher had a windfall tax, for goodness sake. So she did it twice. She did it on, I think, North Sea Oil and Energy, and then she did it on the banks as well.
Yeah.
Now, if the Archdeacon of all things capitalist can see an argument, and she actually set out the mathematics as well, exactly as you've just said. Look, these are not, they haven't got additional profits because of amazing diligence or hard work on behalf of the board or something like that. They've kind of lucked in. That's partly why this is going on. And Thatcher knew that. And so she was quite relaxed about saying, well, this is the right circumstances for a windfall tax.
Yeah, you make a lot of sense there. And so did she. And that's a rare thing, I think, for me to think that about Margaret Thatcher. But the other point is, of course, that tens of millions of people are paying 2 or 3 times as much for their energy right now because of the energy crisis. And that money, a lot of it is going straight to these oil companies who are, charging sometimes up to 10 times as much for the same product a year later than they did the year before, for no good reason except the global commodity market put the price up. And so it makes sense to take that from where it's landed and put it back to where it came from.
Charlotte on Twitter, are you still planning to be at COP27?
Yeah, kind of, to the degree that I plan most things, which is that I'd like to be there, and I'm kind of, saying I'm going to be there, but I haven't done anything about it, if you know what I mean. But I've just got a few months left, a bit like Boris Johnson is green pledging, really, and it sounds good, I haven't really got a plan to get there, but maybe
it's in Egypt, isn't it?
It's in Egypt. It's quite a long way.
I was going to say you can't walk there. That's give it a go.
I originally was thinking I'd go there overland in an electric camper van, and then I thought, how about sailing there? I've got to find a low carbon way to get there anyway.
Yeah, well, there might be a way, and of course, there's camel power when you arrive there.
Yeah, once you get there, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's all right, isn't it?
Yeah, and the electric hovercraft doesn't have the range, right?
Not yet, but that's a matter of time, right?
Yeah, reckon.
Here's an interesting one, Dale. Don't use Ukraine conflict as a reason for dropping net zero commitments. And I kind of sniffed this one out a few weeks ago when everything sort of first kicked off in Ukraine. You only need a big event. The pandemic would be one example. And this will be another example, because it takes nothing for politicians to go, great, we now have a catch-all excuse for loads of shit we haven't done. And environment is clearly in that bracket.
Yeah, and I think this came from Mark Carney. Was he ex-governor of the Bank of England, now UN climate envoy?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. And he didn't name names, but clearly was pointing the finger at our old friends in the net zero scrotum group, the group of Tory MPs that, have tried to use the Ukraine conflict actually to beat down the minimalistic green commitments that this government already has, and they've talked up fracking, for God's sake, coal mines in Cumbria and Wales, all kinds of nonsense, but yeah, he was talking about that. And it's already underway, Mark, by the way. He must have noticed that.
Are you familiar with a guy called Lord Monckton?
No, I don't think I am.
Okay. No, you mentioned the Tory scrotum group. I don't think he's on that, but I think he's one of those guys that did make a documentary on once why the environment issues were all clearly cobblers and nonsense. And then at the end of it, someone did a really inconvenient thing by showing him some facts, which he never thought to look at in the first place. And all chaos ensued afterwards. Lord Monckton, look up Lord Monckton. He's a curious character.
Yeah. I probably won't, okay, but thank you.
Yeah, maybe not. It will scare you.
This reminds me, I think it was only last week we were talking about how these climate skeptic groups are funded actually by fossil fuel interests.
That's right, yeah. And you look at it, you think, okay, is there a conflict of interest? Yeah. Quite a big one.
Yeah, just a bit.
This was interesting. Vettel considering retiring from F1 over the climate impact. This is Sebastian Vettel, of course, champion racing driver. When you hear a voice like that say, maybe this isn't a good thing to be doing, I think people have to sit up and listen.
You can't argue with it, really, can you? I mean, the Formula One is a polluting sport. It's a global roadshow, isn't it? And that comes with a big impact. So, fair play to him.
Let's just get a final kind of encapsulation then where Forest Green are on what happened in the week then, Del, because as I said, there's been a lot in the post bag. It was clearly something, I think it's in your character to think this is a bit strange, but move on, not to dwell and all the rest of it. So all of that makes sense. But there clearly was a moment of, an unusual moment, could I say, of some anger. Would that be fair?
Disappointment, actually, and that's what I said to Rob when I spoke to him. Just disappointment. That's how I felt that he'd not spoken to me about it, and actually he took on board. Said, yeah, he gets that, apologized. Said he was advised, okay, to. Well, yeah, what did he say?
I mean, because you've actually had a conversation with him. I mean, that's one step, I suppose. But how did he frame his kind of reasoning?
Well, it was exactly like that. I finally, for a bit of context, right? The rumors have been going around for a week. We'd just won the league, had a party, and there were these persistent rumors he was going to Watford, and we kept pushing them away, saying, look, it's not happening. Watford haven't been in touch on the one hand, which is the normal way to do things. Yeah. And Rob hasn't said anything, and he's a guy we know, he's completely honest, blah blah blah. But on Tuesday, it came to a head, and I thought, I'm going to have to call him. And he answered the phone, and he is within his first few words, I knew the story was true. He's like, oh, I was going to call you. It's all happened so fast, and it's also kind of like, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I know what's happening now. So he told me that he was going to go to Watford, and I was like, well, I'm just so disappointed that you didn't speak to me. What, why has it been kept secret? And he said, basically, that was the advice he was given. I'm like, by who? Apparently it was Watford and his own agent. And he's like, well, yeah, but why take that advice, right? That's poor judgment.
Well, I mean, there's the obvious headline here. You're joining a team that had just been relegated and leaving one that's just been promoted. So, I mean, there's that. I mean, that's not an insignificant component in this discussion.
No, that's right. And Watford are in a bit of a pickle on and off the pitch, I would say. And, any club that recruits like this is not in a good place because, the ethics of a club or any organization, in my view, come from the top. And this is a bad thing. I think it's a big risk that both are taking, actually. Watford are taking on a guy that's had 1 year in League Two, and Rob is joining a club that's in a mess and has gone through 9 managers in 5 years. So.
Well, I was about to say, my mate who's a diehard Watford fan, my producer Ryan, he said, well, don't worry because he won't be there in 3 weeks. I thought that's a fairly good analysis. They really have gone like a dose of salts. Managers go through Watford at the moment.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting. Somebody said to me this morning, maybe that's why they've gone for a League Two manager because the credible Premier League types that could be available for the job are all looking at the gig and saying, "Nah, I'll wait for something better to come along."
Yeah, I think it's the one trophy Watford do own at the moment is for going through most managers. So. This one from just a final one, Del. Jamie emailing says, any news on your green gas plans? When will your first plant be and then that's where the question stops.
Oh, right. Cool. Anyway, I can answer it, even though it's only half a question. We're putting out half questions are probably best, actually. Give me more scope, don't they?
Just give half an answer.
I'll stop there, right? So we're putting out a report next week, which we commissioned from Imperial College London, because I figured that they got more credibility than me, right? When they say something, it'll carry more weight than when I say something. And I've been saying this something about green gas for like years now, like 5 years since we put our first report out. So we gave them everything we had and said, work out if what we're saying is right. Is there a national possibility to power the country on green gas made from grass? That comes out next week. I can give you a sneak preview. It's a good answer. And we're going to break ground on our first project next week, next Friday, I think it is, at Reading, where we're building the first one, which will make enough gas for 4,000 homes. And we're going to try and give the whole thing a relaunch. Hey, guys, politicians, media, anybody that will listen, except George Monbiot, of course, because he won't listen. Say, look, there's a possibility here, to make all the gas we need. Forget Ukraine, forget Saudi Arabia, forget struggling to fight climate change by decarbonizing how we heat our homes, because the answer's here right under our feet.
There it is. Dale, have a crack. I hope next week's better than last week, but I'm sure it already feels as if it is. So there you go.
Well, bear in mind, in the last 7 days, we did win League Two.
Well, I was going to say that's the big headline. The takeaway headline in the world of football is precisely that, and nothing can overshadow it. And congratulations, by the way, on that. So
thank you.
We'll speak next week, Dale.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Cheers, Ian.
Cheers. That's it for this episode. Don't forget, of course, you can follow this podcast from your podcast provider so you get each new episode automatically. Leave a review there too. You can get in touch, zerocarbonista@ecotricity.co.uk, and do follow Dale on social media, which is twitter.com/DaleVince, facebook.com/DaleVince.
Zero Carbon
East Off.